Shabbat Shalom. So, Friday morning I was actually very excited because I realized, even though it was Shabbat Zachor, I was going to be, for the first time in 3 years, I was not going to speak about anti-Semitism. I actually said to myself, we're going to take this opportunity that it's Shabbat Zachor to say the greatest threat to the Jewish people is assimilation and not anti-Semitism. And then, of course, everything changed. So instead of doing that, I owe you that one. I'm going to talk about why Purim is my favorite holiday. And it has very little to do with the customs and the drinking. More than a little, but it has a lot to do with the nature of the holiday. It is the only holiday in our calendar where God is not mentioned in the story. It is the only holiday in our calendar, appears in the Tanakh, right? The book of Esther, where we as a people defend ourselves, not waiting for divine intervention. And that is tremendous. If you heard Carlos speak to his children, you heard the stories. We all grew up with those stories. My parents came from here and my grandparents came from here. And they did that to us there, and they tortured us there, and they looked at us that way there, and then we got here. Those stories, every single one of us carries in their hearts. And Purim reminds us that for us as Jews, prayer is not enough. That sometimes instead of praying, or together with praying, we have to realize that it's up to us to defend ourselves, to stand up for ourselves, to become the people that we were destined to be. Mamlechet Kohanim Begoy Kadosh. And so, today we are commanded in the Torah to remember what Amalek did to us. And this is more than just a commandment where you exercise the action of reading from the Torah on a specific Shabbat. This is a moral imperative. Remembering what Amalek did to us is just more than just reading from a book. It's personal. And let me remind you what they used to do to us. Amalek was specifically evil and signaled out in the Torah because it attacked the stragglers and the elderly and the children at the back of the line. It was an enemy that killed those who could not defend themselves, who was waiting for the moment where you least expected. And then they struck against Israel. Shabbat Zachor is not only about history. It is about recognizing that in every generation, like we will read in a couple of weeks from the Pesach Haggadah, somebody rises up and tries to destroy us. And it's about reminding us that in every generation, we have to rise up ourselves and prevent that from happening. And the Megillah is very explicit about that. We will be reading it on Monday night. Let's talk before the Megillah about the Haftarah for this Shabbat. If you follow the reading of the Haftarah, it's epic. King Saul is told by Samuel, who's told by God, finish the Amalekites. Do not leave anyone standing. From the cattle to the king, no one can survive. And King Saul, for reasons that we do not know, but we can speculate, does not carry out the order of God. He spares King Agag, by the way, and not only does he spare Agag, but he spares the cattle, the sheep, completely disobeying God. Why? Because he couldn't fathom the idea that to survive, he at some point had to do the unthinkable. Not only defend himself, but be on the offensive. Not only defend himself, but actually take action before our enemies finished us. And he couldn't carry that responsibility. By the way, there's nothing more precious than hearing Jewish children in the sanctuary today, right? Because if there's a reason why what's happening today is happening, it's so that those children can keep on crying in our sanctuaries. And so, I want to bring you back to what Amalek sought to do to us in the story of the Megillah. Haman, a direct descendant of Agag, according to the Megillah, had the mission to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all the Jews, young and old. And the language is very chilling because it's so precise. It doesn't leave any room for doubt of what is going to happen. We doubt ourselves. Should we defend ourselves? How should we act? Our enemies don't. They don't think about it for 2 seconds. If they had a nuclear bomb, boom, we would be gone. Today, dear friends, and I say this with trepidation, we're living amongst the strongest generation of Jews that ever lived. Not because of our resilience, because God knows that we have resisted in the past and we survived the past, but because today we have returned to our homeland. We live in our own sovereign state if we choose to do so. And for the first time in millennia, in thousands of years, we hold the power to shape our fate and, believe it or not, to help Western civilization defend itself from the powers that seek to destroy not only us, but them too. We need to feel this with deep pride and deep gratitude and the responsibility of this extraordinary moment. Because as I'm speaking right now, hundreds of missiles are landing on Israel. There are explosions everywhere. Cities like Netanya, right, where nothing ever happened, we can hear the booms. And this is our sacrifice. And let me remember, together with you, why we need to do this. Do you know how many times, before they started putting together a nuclear weapon, this murderous Iranian regime sought out Jews outside of Israel to kill them? More than I can count. I have been to the site of the AMIA, the community center in Argentina, to the site of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, where there's a crater today, where countless people died, and the perpetrators were never persecuted because they were Iranians that fled back to Iran and nothing could be done to them, because they pursue a state policy of terror, of killing Jews explicitly. Let me remind you, when we read about Amalek in the Torah, it is primitive. They attacked the stragglers. They used bows and arrows, swords. But think about what happens when anti-Semitism becomes industrial. When genocide is used like a machine. That, by the way, is now also primitive. Because if anybody wants to commit genocide today, the only thing they have to do is press a button. And that's what we're fighting, this war. And that's what our planes, together with American planes, are bombing Iran right now. There's a pasuk, there's a verse in the book of Esther that says, "Umi yodea im laet kazot igat lamalchut." And who knows, maybe it's for such a time as this that you got to royalty. That's what Mordechai says to Esther. Maybe it is for such a time as this. Maybe that's where we belong to this generation. To be part of a time such as this, where we look at the world in the eye and say, no more. And by the way, it is important that we say that. If you think about what happened in Israel, it is not about left or right. or the opposition, they're all together. The entire people of Israel understands what the sacrifice is for. Many of us have children serving in the IDF. I cannot even explain to you how my heart goes out to all of us as we feel the weight of this moment. But it's important to remember that the only thing that keeps Auschwitz from happening again is that tiny state in the middle of the Middle East, in the crossroads of the continents. It's that land that we have paid with too much blood for. Today, we as Jews are not petitioners. We're not asking anyone to defend us. We're not asking anyone to take us in. We're not depending on a foreign empire. We're actually helping an empire. Take that with a grain of salt, right? When there's an attack in Israel, when Iran threatens us openly, every day, for years and years, we have to do something about it. And let me tell you a story. I have a dear friend of mine who is Muslim, he's Iranian, and I see him once in a while, and every time we see each other, he actually asks me, when do you think someone is going to help our people to get rid of these ayatollahs? And I said to him, you know, it's interesting, because you're asking the questions that my grandparents used to ask, right? Who's going to help us? Who's going to be there for us? Well, I have to tell you, I am so proud that we're helping the Iranian people. Before the Ayatollahs came to power, Iran was a tremendous ally of our people and of Israel. These murderous radical Islamists will stop at nothing. And you saw it the last couple of months. How many Iranians died in the streets? The way the Megillah ends, by the way, is remarkable. You usually never get to the end because we have such a mess going on here that, you know, it's like an afterthought. But the end is important. In a very controversial ending, the Jews go and they defend themselves. And they kill those who sought to kill them. God forbid, right? That we will actually defend ourselves. Victims no more. We cannot be victims anymore. You know, reading the Haftorah and the Parsha for Shabbat Zachor, not as people eternal in dispersion, is a completely different experience. Reading Shabbat Zachor with the Israeli Air Force over the skies of Tehran and the American Air Force over the skies of Tehran is a completely different experience. It is not about defending ourselves, about remembering so it won't happen. It is about remembering so we can prevent it. And that's what we're doing today. I want to remind you that we're not Jews that live in Shushan anymore. And we should be proud of that. And I will also remind you that we are the Jews who have a sovereign state and are a sovereign people. And one more reminder, I'm going to read the end of the Haftorah. Because the end of this Haftorah is not only prophetic, but it should be chilling to all of us. So Shmuel has to get involved because King Saul doesn't know what to do. And Shmuel goes and he brings King Hagag. He said, bring me Hagag. And Hagag comes stumbling in the presence of Shmuel and he says, Achen sar mara mavet. Oh, death is at hand, Hagag says. He can smell it, he can see it, and he knows why it's happening. He knows. When you do something consistently for your entire life, and humiliate others and kill others, you know why your end is coming. And then Samuel says, Vayomer Shmuel, Kasher shikla nashim charbecha, ken tishkal minashim imecha. Just like your sword made so many women childless, may this sword make your mother childless. There are no more powerful words to frame the opening salvo from last night. When that bomb from a plane with the Star of David on its side fell on the offices of the Ayatollah, this is what God recreated in history for us. And by the way, there are no coincidences. Shabbat Zachor is poignant. It is more than a moment in time. Shabbat Zachor, dear friends, is today. Shabbat Shalom. May I please ask us to rise? We're going to continue the back cover of our Sidurim. In the back cover of our Sidurim, we find the prayer for the soldiers of the IDF. I'm going to ask us to please recite it together. משברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב ואימותינו שרה רבקה רחל ולאה ויברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל העומדים על משמר ארצנו וערי אלוהינו מגבול הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול עד לבוא ערבה ביבשה באוויר ובמים ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם, ויתרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון. ויקוים בהם הכתוב, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם, להושיע אתכם, ונאמר אמן. I also want to ask God for God's protection for the men and women of the armed forces of the United States. Liz reminded me last night that on the Abraham Lincoln, one of the flyers, one of the pilots, is a child, well, no longer a child, that grew up in our congregation. And I cannot tell you his name, but we have him in our prayers and in our thoughts. And may God bless and protect all of our soldiers.
Amen.
We're going to continue on page 184 with a Chatzi Kaddish for Musaf.
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה קדוצי וימליך מלכותי בחייכו ובימיכו ובחי כל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך והעלם עולם מעלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ונשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קדושה בריחו לעילה מן כה ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
We continue praying